There is a specific kind of loneliness that has no name in most languages. It is not the loneliness of being alone. It is not the loneliness of having no friends. It is the loneliness of being in a room full of people and feeling further from them than if you were on the other side of the world. You are smiling. You are nodding. You are saying the right things. And inside, you are completely, utterly, devastatingly alone. If you have felt this, and you know immediately whether you have, then this video was made for you. Because one man understood this feeling more deeply than anyone who ever lived. He did not just experience it. He spent his entire life mapping it, naming it, and ultimately transforming it into something extraordinary. His name was Arthur Schopenhauer. And what he discovered about loneliness will change how you understand yourself forever. Subscribe. We go this deep every week.
Before anything else, we need to separate two things that most people treat as the same. The first is ordinary loneliness, the loneliness of someone who wants connection and cannot find it, who reaches out and finds no hand, who sits alone and wishes they were not. This loneliness is painful, it is real, and it deserves real attention. But then there is the second kind, the loneliness of someone surrounded by people and still, somehow, unreachably alone. Not because no one is present, but because no one present can quite reach them. This is the loneliness of depth, the loneliness of a mind that has traveled further than the people around it, and stands now in territory that has no map and no company. Schopenhauer called this the loneliness of the exceptional mind, and he said it is the most misunderstood form of suffering in human existence. Let me tell you about the man. Arthur Schopenhauer was born in 1788 in Danzig, what is now Poland. His father was a wealthy merchant. His mother was a celebrated novelist. By birth, he had every advantage. By temperament, he was completely unsuited to the world he had been born into. From childhood, he felt it. The gap. The sense that other people were operating on a different frequency. One he could hear, but not quite tune into. His mother, with whom he had a famously difficult relationship, once told him bluntly, "You are impossible to live with." He eventually agreed. Not with bitterness, with understanding. He published his masterwork, The World as Will and Representation, at 30 years old. It was almost completely ignored. He spent the next 2 decades watching lesser minds receive the recognition he had spent everything to earn. And slowly, in that silence, he built something the recognition could never have given him. Now, the mechanism. Why does a deeper mind feel more alone? Schopenhauer had a precise answer, rooted in his philosophy of consciousness. He believed that the quality of your inner life, its richness, its complexity, its sensitivity to what others miss, determines how isolated you feel in ordinary conversation. Here is the mechanism in plain terms. When you think in a language that is entirely your own. A private language of associations, images, feelings, and connections that no one else shares exactly. And when you try to communicate that thinking, you are forced to translate, to compress, to simplify. And in that compression, something essential is always lost. The richer the original, the more is lost in translation. The most complex inner lives suffer the most in ordinary conversation. Not because people are unkind, because the gap is simply too wide to fully cross.
The person who carries this kind of loneliness almost always receives the wrong diagnosis. From themselves, from their families, from the culture they live in. The diagnosis sounds like this. You are too sensitive, too serious, too intense, too much. You need to learn to connect better. You need to open up more. You need to be more like everyone else. And the person, because they are suffering, believes it. They try to shrink. They try to simplify. They perform a version of themselves that is easier to be around. And they become lonelier. Because now they are not just separated from others by their depth. They are separated from themselves by their performance of smallness. Schopenhauer's counter-diagnosis was as uncomfortable as it was liberating. The problem is not your depth. The problem is that you have been taught to be ashamed of it. This brings us to the distinction that changed everything for Schopenhauer, and that can change everything for you. The difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is involuntary. It is the ache of being alone when you don't want to be. It arrives without permission. It hurts. It signals that something is missing. Solitude is chosen. It is the deliberate decision to be with yourself, not because you cannot find company, but because your own company has become genuinely, deeply sufficient. Schopenhauer wrote one of the most beautiful things ever written about this. A man can be himself only so long as he is alone. And if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. For it is only when he is alone that he is truly free. The movement from loneliness to solitude, from the involuntary ache to the chosen peace, is not automatic. It is earned. It requires a specific kind of inner work. But it is available to anyone willing to do that work. Let me ask you something directly. When you feel most alone, what is it that you are actually missing? Most people say connection, being understood, having someone who truly gets them. And Schopenhauer would say, go deeper than that. What you are truly missing, what every deeply lonely person is missing, is not just someone who understands them. It is someone who can inhabit the same level of reality they actually live in. Not the surface level they perform, the real level, the level of full depth. And here is the truth Schopenhauer spent years arriving at. Most people cannot go there. Not because they are bad, not because they don't care, but because now the most important idea in this video. Schopenhauer believed, and spent his life demonstrating, that the capacity for profound loneliness and the capacity for a profound inner life are not separate things. They are the same thing, two faces of the same gift. The sensitivity that makes you feel the absence of genuine connection so acutely is the exact same sensitivity that lets you experience music at a depth most people never reach, that lets you be genuinely moved by ideas, by beauty,
by the weight of a moment, that lets you feel things that most people walk right past without noticing. You cannot surgically remove the loneliness without also removing the depth. They are not two things. They are one thing. Schopenhauer wrote, "The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him. But the man of deeper perception finds himself surrounded by questions he cannot stop asking. The questions are the loneliness. The questions are also the gift."
So, how do you live with it? Schopenhauer's answer came in 3 parts. First, stop treating your loneliness as a problem to be solved. A problem can be fixed. A condition must be understood and lived skillfully. The moment you stop treating your loneliness as evidence that something is broken and start treating it as a natural feature of the kind of mind you were given, something shifts. The suffering does not disappear, but it changes quality. It becomes bearable, even, at times, beautiful. Second, build your inner world with the same seriousness and care that others put into their social world. Schopenhauer spent his life doing this, reading voraciously, thinking deeply. Third, and this is the part most people find hardest, seek connection deliberately, not desperately. There is an enormous difference. Desperate seeking pours your full depth into every connection, regardless of whether that connection has the capacity to receive it. And it leaves you more exhausted, more disappointed, more alone than before. Deliberate seeking is different. It moves slowly. It tests carefully. It withholds the deepest parts until there is evidence, real, demonstrated evidence, that the other person can hold them. And when it finds the right person, it gives completely, freely, without reservation. Schopenhauer observed something counterintuitive about this approach. The person who stops performing, stops shrinking, stops desperately seeking, becomes paradoxically more attractive to the very people they were looking for. In his 70s, after 5 decades of near total obscurity, Schopenhauer became famous. Not the fame of a young man who had achieved what he hoped for, the fame of an old man who had outlasted the world's indifference. Visitors came expecting bitterness, a man who had been ignored for 50 years, surely angry, surely broken. What they found instead was the most peaceful man many of them had ever met. He had not overcome his loneliness. He had transformed his relationship to it. He had stopped measuring his worth by whether the world could understand him, and found something that did not require external confirmation to stand upright. His poodle, who he named Atma, the Sanskrit word for the world soul, sat at his feet. His books were finally being read. His walks along the river Main continued unchanged. And he was, at last, at peace. Not because the loneliness had left, but because he had finally made friends with it.
If you are watching this and you recognize yourself in it, if you know immediately what it feels like to be in a room full of people and feel further from them than if you were completely alone, then I want to say something to you that Schopenhauer spent his life trying to say. Your loneliness is not a verdict. It is not evidence that you are broken or unlovable or fundamentally wrong in some way you cannot name.
It is the price of a mind that feels things fully, that thinks deeply, that requires more than most from the connections it makes. That is not a curse. That is a life being lived at full depth. Full depth costs something. What it costs is the easy comfort of shallow company. What it gives is everything else. The man who understood loneliness better than anyone did not end his life wishing he had felt less. He ended it having used every year of his extraordinary, isolated, deeply felt existence to understand what it means to be human in a way no one else quite managed. Your loneliness is not the problem. What you do with it is everything. If this video reached something real, subscribe. Leave a comment with the moment you first understood that your loneliness